Little black twins beg a judge for help, and he immediately bursts into tears. 2 girls, 1 courtroom. They ask for one thing: please don't send us back. The judge breaks down on the spot. But why? What secret connects him to these girls? And what's coming that could take them away forever? Don't look away. This story will break your heart and heal it in the same breath. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The overhead fans whirred softly in the small-town Georgia courtroom, pushing around the warm morning air without really cooling anything. Old wooden benches creaked as people shifted in their seats, their whispers echoing off the high ceilings. The bailiff glanced at his watch for the 3rd time, his keys jingling at his hip as he rocked back on his heels, impatience etched across his weathered face. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the worn floor, highlighting the dust motes that danced in the still air. When the side door finally opened with a long creak, the entire courtroom fell silent. 2 tiny figures stepped through, their matching pale blue dresses with white collars standing out against the dark wood paneling. Grace and Glory Williams moved in perfect sync, their small patent leather shoes clicking against the floor like delicate metronomes. They were identical in every way, down to their neatly braided hair with matching white ribbons, but their expressions told different stories. Grace's eyes darted around the room with cautious hope, while Glory's remained downcast, guarded. Their thin shoulders hunched slightly forward, as if bracing against an invisible wind. Grace clutched a well-loved stuffed bunny, its ears drooping and fur matted from years of tears and tight squeezes. The toy's once pink nose had faded to a dull gray, and one button eye hung loose by a thread, dangling precariously with each step she took. Glory's hands wrapped around a worn photograph, its edges soft and curved from constant handling, the only picture they had of their mother. Her thumb traced the smiling woman's face in a gentle, familiar rhythm, a habit she'd developed that seemed to calm her racing heart. Behind them, Ms. Clara Jennings walked with slow, tired steps. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, but wisps had escaped around her face like tiny white flags of surrender. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of too many cases, too many children, too many heartbreaks. Her navy suit hung slightly loose on her frame, as if she'd been slowly disappearing inside it. The folder she carried was thick with papers, 6 years of 2 lives reduced to reports and evaluations. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice softer than usual. The Honorable Judge Benjamin Cole presiding. Judge Cole entered, his silver hair catching the morning light from the tall windows. His face was a mask of careful neutrality, the same expression he'd worn through thousands of cases. Deep lines around his mouth betrayed years of keeping emotions firmly in check. He sat down, adjusted his robes with practiced hands, and looked at the file before him, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. His fingers, strong and steady, flipped through the first few pages with practiced efficiency. "Case number 2347 regarding the placement of Grace and Glory Williams," he announced, his deep voice filling the courtroom like rolling thunder. Ms. Jennings gently guided the girls forward, her hand barely touching their shoulders. Grace's small fingers tightened around her bunny's neck until her knuckles whitened. Glory's photograph crinkled slightly in her grip, the sound almost imperceptible in the hushed room. A ceiling fan wobbled overhead, creating a rhythmic squeak that seemed to match the quickening beat of the twins' hearts. The judge began reviewing the case details, his tone measured and professional. But Grace suddenly took a small step forward. Her voice came out barely louder than a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, everyone heard every word, as if the building itself had leaned in to listen. "Please, Mr. Judge," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in autumn. "Please don't send us back. We'll be good." Tears welled up in her eyes, making them shine like polished glass. "We just want someone to love us, someone who won't hurt us no more." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Judge Cole's hand tightened around his gavel until his knuckles turned white, the wood creaking under his grip. For a moment, he sat perfectly still, staring at the 2 small girls before him, seeing past their matching dresses to the wounded souls beneath. Something flickered behind his professional mask. A crack in the carefully constructed wall. Then something extraordinary happened. Judge Benjamin Cole, known throughout 3 counties for his unwavering composure, stood up. He walked down from his bench, his robes swishing against the steps like waves against a shore. The bailiff started forward, then stopped, uncertain, his hand hovering over his belt. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a silence so profound it seemed to have weight. Benjamin knelt in front of the twins, his knees cracking against the hard floor. Tears streamed down his face, catching in the wrinkles around his mouth and dripping onto his black robe. His voice broke as he whispered, "Oh God, what have we done?" The words seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him, a place he'd kept locked away for years. The bailiff quietly moved through the stunned courtroom, ushering people out with gentle nudges and meaningful glances. Ms. Jennings stood frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Glory reached for her sister's hand, their fingers intertwining like vines seeking strength as they watched the judge cry, their own eyes wide with confusion and wonder. For the first time that day, Glory looked up fully, her guarded expression softening into something like curiosity. Benjamin finally stood and walked to his chambers, closing the door behind him with a soft click that echoed in the emptying courtroom. He sank into his chair, his hands shaking as he opened the girl's file. A tear fell onto the manila folder, darkening the paper like a small storm cloud. The clock ticked past noon, then 1, then 2. But he remained at his desk, staring at the file that contained 2 little girls' whole world, the weight of their future heavy on his shoulders. Outside his window, life continued. Birds sang, cars passed, people went about their day. But inside, time seemed suspended as a decision formed in his heart. Benjamin sat alone in his chambers, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across his desk. His hands trembled slightly as he reopened the manila folder containing Grace and Glory's case file. The paper was thin and cheap, the kind that tore easily with the slightest pressure. Coffee stains marked several corners, and the edges were worn from countless handlings by overworked social workers who had too many children and too little time. His stomach turned as he began to read more carefully. Names were crossed out and rewritten multiple times, dates were scribbled in different colored inks, and entire sections were left blank or filled with hasty scrawls. Some pages were held together with yellowing tape that had lost most of its adhesive. He pulled out his reading glasses, leaning closer to decipher the hurried handwriting that danced across the pages like angry ants marching to an invisible rhythm. First placement terminated due to, he muttered, squinting at the smudged text, behavioral issues. The next page made his blood run cold. Children found locked in laundry room. 5 days. Minimal food and water. His throat tightened at the clinical way such cruelty was documented, as if describing nothing more significant than a minor household incident. Benjamin's hand clenched around his pen until his knuckles went white. He flipped through more pages, each one worse than the last. One foster home had separated the twins, sending Glory to a different county for 3 months. Another report mentioned night terrors and chronic bedwetting, with a handwritten note in the margin, unsuitable for placement with working parents. 6 different homes in just 2 years. The file read like a roadmap of abandonment, with each stop marked by another adult who had given up on them. With shaking fingers, he picked up his phone and dialed Family Services Dispatch. The operator's voice was tired, mechanical, the sound of someone who had heard too many sad stories and could no longer afford to feel the weight of each one. "Yes, this is Judge Benjamin Cole. I need verification on case file WL-2347. Yes, I'll hold." While waiting, he studied the girls' intake photos. Their eyes held a wariness no 7-year-old should know, their small faces frozen in expressions too solemn for children. Glory's gaze seemed to look through the camera, not at it, as if already expecting disappointment. The operator came back on the line, confirming every horrible detail. Benjamin closed his eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to break through decades of practiced stoicism. He knew what he had to do. In his bottom drawer was a dusty legal handbook, rarely used and nearly forgotten. He found the section on judicial emergency discretionary custody, a clause so old most judges didn't know it existed, buried beneath layers of newer legislation like an ancient fossil waiting to be discovered. Ms. Jennings arrived quickly after his call. She looked even more exhausted than before, her cardigan buttoned wrong, and her hair escaping its clip in wispy strands that framed her tired face. "You understand what you're asking?" she said, studying the emergency custody forms with bloodshot eyes. "This isn't standard procedure. There will be questions, maybe even an investigation." "Clara," Benjamin said softly, using her first name for the first time in 15 years of court proceedings. "Look at this file. Really look at it." She did, her lined face growing paler with each page she turned. Without another word, she signed the transfer papers, her pen scratching loudly in the quiet room like a confession. The girls were brought up from the courthouse waiting area. Grace's bunny hung limply from her hand, one ear frayed and dirty from years of desperate clutching, while Glory clutched her photograph closer to her chest, the corner folded protectively inward as if shielding it from the world's harsh gaze. Benjamin gathered his briefcase and coat, leading them toward the parking lot with gentle words of reassurance that felt foreign on his tongue. The setting sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples as they reached his car. He opened the back door, helping them with their seatbelts, making sure they were secure. Looking into their uncertain faces, he spoke quietly but firmly. "You'll be safe tonight, I promise." The words felt heavy with responsibility, a weight he hadn't allowed himself to carry in many years. As he pulled away from the courthouse, the evening light caught his rearview mirror, reflecting the image of two small figures sitting perfectly still in his back seat, their shadows stretching long behind them like the ghosts of all they had endured. The Mercedes rolled slowly down the long driveway, gravel crunching under its tires. Ancient oak trees lined both sides, their branches heavy with drooping Spanish moss that swayed in the evening breeze. In the back seat, Grace and Glory pressed their faces against the windows, taking in the sprawling grounds with wide, uncertain eyes. Their small fingers left smudges on the glass as they silently observed their new surroundings. Benjamin's estate came into view, a weathered plantation-style house with tall white columns and wraparound porches. Paint peeled slightly around the shutters, and climbing roses had grown wild up one side. The grounds showed signs of neglect. Overgrown flower beds and unruly shrubs testified to years of minimal maintenance. Bird feeders hung empty from tree branches, and a stone bird bath stood dry in what once had been a manicured garden. "Here we are," Benjamin said softly, parking near the front steps. The girls remained motionless in the back seat until he opened their door. They stepped out carefully, holding hands, their small shoes crunching on the gravel. They huddled close together, taking in the enormity of the house that towered above them. Inside, Benjamin led them up the curved staircase to the second floor. The house smelled of old wood and leather-bound books. Their footsteps echoed on hardwood floors that had been polished by generations of feet. Family portraits lined the walls, stern faces from another era watching their ascent with painted eyes. "This will be your room," he said, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with twin beds. Faded quilts covered each mattress, and heavy curtains framed tall windows. The furniture was solid oak, clearly antique but well-maintained. A delicate porcelain lamp sat on the nightstand between the beds. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. The girls explored cautiously, touching nothing at first. Glory ran her finger along the windowsill while Grace tested the softness of a pillow. Their eyes darted around the room, taking inventory of what was now theirs, at least temporarily. Later that evening, Benjamin stood in his kitchen, frowning at a pot of boiling water. He'd found an old box of spaghetti in the pantry and a jar of sauce. The noodles turned out mushy and stuck together in clumps. The sauce was watery where he'd tried to stretch it. He stirred the concoction with a wooden spoon, wondering when he'd last cooked a proper meal. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a cook," he admitted as they sat at the massive dining room table. The girls didn't seem to mind. They twirled the slippery noodles around their forks, occasionally losing grip. When a particularly long strand slipped off Glory's fork and left a red streak on her chin, she let out a small giggle. Grace looked at her sister in surprise, then started giggling too. The sound of their laughter, though quiet, filled the room with unexpected warmth. For a moment, the old house seemed to breathe with new life. That night, Benjamin positioned an armchair in the hallway outside their room. He could hear their soft whispers as they settled into bed. The case file sat heavy in his lap, each page a testament to failure. Failure of the system, failure of adults who should have protected them. His eyes caught on familiar names and dates, each representing another broken promise to these children. He rubbed his tired eyes and turned another page, determined to understand their journey. As he sat there in the growing darkness, a memory surfaced unbidden. His daughter Hannah at 7, sitting on the porch steps with a book nearly as big as she was, her hair catching the summer light. He'd been too busy then, always too busy. The weight of that regret pressed on him now as he listened to the twins' whispers grow fainter. The house creaked and settled around him as night fell. The stuffed bunny had been left in the hallway, and Benjamin picked it up, holding it gently in his lap. Its worn fur spoke of years of comfort and tears. After a long while, he stood stiffly and whispered at their door, "Good night, girls." His footsteps faded down the hall, each creak of the old wood marking his passage through the silent house. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its lonely sound echoing across the estate. Sunlight streamed through the white curtains, casting soft shadows across the twin beds. Grace and Glory woke early, their bodies still on group home schedule. They whispered to each other, sharing quiet observations about their new room, waiting until they heard movement downstairs before venturing out of their temporary sanctuary. The girls crept down the grand staircase, holding hands for reassurance, following the smell of burnt toast and coffee. In the kitchen, Benjamin stood at the stove, spatula in hand, staring intently at a pan of eggs that were quickly becoming overcooked. His silver hair was slightly disheveled, his usual judicial composure replaced by domestic uncertainty. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled with the unfamiliar task. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound cheerful despite the smoke rising from the toaster. "I hope you like eggs." The girls nodded silently, climbing onto the tall kitchen stools. They ate the burnt toast and rubbery eggs without complaint, their eyes darting occasionally to Benjamin as he fumbled with the coffee maker, pressing buttons randomly until it finally gurgled to life. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Hannah Cole sat at her desk in her downtown law office, reviewing case files for a discrimination lawsuit. Her phone buzzed, a text from Carol Matthews, her longtime friend at the Savannah courthouse. "Your father took emergency custody of twin girls yesterday. Black, 7 years old, complete breakdown in court. Never seen anything like it." Hannah's hand tightened around her phone, knuckles turning white. Her father, the same man who'd sentenced countless black youth to maximum terms, who'd refused to review clear cases of racial bias, was now playing savior? The irony made her stomach turn. She read the message 3 times, each time feeling her blood pressure rise. Without a word to her secretary, Hannah grabbed her car keys and briefcase. The drive to Savannah took just over 3 hours, each mile fueling her anger. She barely noticed the coastal landscape blurring past her window. By mid-afternoon, she pulled into the familiar driveway of her childhood home, tires spitting gravel as she braked too hard. The heavy front door crashed against the wall as Hannah stormed in. "Dad!" Her voice echoed through the foyer, bouncing off the high ceilings. Benjamin appeared from the kitchen, dish towel in hand, startled by the intrusion. His expression shifted from surprise to wariness in an instant. "Hannah, what do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. "Taking in 2 black girls? Is this some kind of PR stunt to make up for your sentencing record? Or just another way to control lives that aren't yours?" Benjamin's face hardened, deep lines appearing around his mouth. "You have no right to barge in here and question my decisions. Where have you been for the past 5 years? Not a single visit, not even a phone call on Christmas, nothing but silence. Don't deflect. This isn't about me, this is about you trying to cleanse your conscience after decades of harsh sentencing. How many kids did you send to juvenile detention without a second thought? How many families did you tear apart with your gavel?" On the stairs, Grace and Glory huddled together, watching the scene unfold. Glory gripped her sister's hand tightly as the angry words flew back and forth. Grace's bottom lip trembled, but Glory's face remained still, her eyes taking in every detail. "You abandoned this family." Benjamin's voice cracked with emotion, revealing pain beneath his judicial exterior. "You walked away because one case didn't go your way, one case out of thousands. That case was a travesty of justice, and you know it." Hannah's eyes blazed with 5 years of pent-up fury. "But now you want to play the caring father? The benevolent judge? After everything you've done?" Hannah snatched her car keys from where she'd dropped them, turning toward the door, but movement caught her eye. Grace sat at the coffee table, carefully coloring with crayons Benjamin had found in a drawer. Her small hand moved methodically across the paper, creating bright swirls of color. Glory approached Hannah quietly, holding out a juice box with both hands, her dark eyes serious and watchful. Hannah froze, her anger momentarily derailed by the unexpected gesture. She sank onto the edge of the couch, her jaw clenched tight, watching the twins as old pain and new confusion warred across her face. Her fingers closed automatically around the juice box, the cool cardboard a stark contrast to the heat of her anger. The evening settled over the old house like a heavy blanket. Through the study window, Benjamin's desk lamp cast a lonely glow as he buried himself in paperwork. In the living room, crayons scratched softly against paper as Grace and Glory colored, their small heads bent together over their artwork. Hannah stood in the foyer, overnight bag slung over her shoulder, car keys jingling in her hand. The familiar portraits on the walls seemed to watch her, reminding her of all the times she'd walked out before. Her fingers tightened around the keys as she took a step toward the door. A gentle knock made her freeze. Behind her, Grace stood in her pale blue nightgown, clutching her worn stuffed bunny. The little girl's eyes were wide and hopeful. "Can you stay just one more night?" Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. She hugged her bunny closer. "You're nice. You don't yell." Hannah's throat tightened. She looked down at her keys, then back at Grace's expectant face. Something in the child's expression made her defenses crack, just slightly. "I suppose one night wouldn't hurt," Hannah said, trying to sound casual despite the unexpected warmth in her chest. That night, Hannah found herself standing awkwardly by the twins' beds, attempting to tuck them in. Her hands weren't quite sure how to smooth the blankets, and she fumbled with the corners. Glory watched her with quiet intensity while Grace hugged her bunny close. "Good night," Hannah managed, switching off the lamp. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the girls' peaceful faces. Morning brought a different kind of quiet. Hannah helped the girls pour cereal while Benjamin remained conspicuously absent. The kitchen filled with the sound of spoons clinking against bowls and fruit being cut. Glory suddenly slipped away from the table, returning moments later with something clutched in her small hand. She approached Hannah shyly, holding out a bracelet made from old beads she'd discovered in a drawer upstairs. The beads were mismatched, some glass, some wooden, strung together on a piece of thread with careful 7-year-old precision. Hannah stared at the offering, her breakfast forgotten. With trembling fingers, she accepted the bracelet, sliding it onto her wrist. The beads caught the morning light, simple and beautiful in their imperfection. From the porch later that morning, Hannah watched the twins playing in the overgrown garden. They chased butterflies through the tall grass, their laughter carrying on the warm Georgia breeze. Her fingers traced the rough edges of Glory's beaded gift. "What are you doing, Hannah?" she whispered to herself, the question hanging in the humid air. Inside the house, Benjamin stood in the shadowed hallway, watching his daughter through the window, his expression unreadable. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Benjamin hunched over his phone, speaking in hushed tones. His coffee grew cold beside him, forgotten in the urgency of his call. "Jim, I need more time with this placement. Yes, I understand the protocols, but..." He glanced toward the stairs where Grace and Glory's laughter drifted down like a melody he was afraid might stop. "Call it a personal favor, please." Hannah entered the kitchen, pouring herself coffee from the pot he'd made earlier. The rich aroma filled the space between them as she caught fragments of her father's conversation and raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued. When he hung up, she crossed her arms defensively, a habit from years of confrontation. "Working within the cracks, Dad?" "Sometimes justice needs a gentle push," he replied, not meeting her eyes, instead focusing on stirring his now lukewarm coffee. The day unfolded slowly, like a book with dog-eared pages. Hannah found herself sorting through a pile of the girls' clothes, many too small or worn thin at the elbows and knees. Glory sat nearby on the carpet, carefully folding tiny socks with a seriousness that belied her age. Under the sink, Benjamin struggled with a wrench while Hannah held a flashlight, their forced proximity in the cramped space making both uncomfortable, shoulders occasionally brushing. "Pass me that gasket," Benjamin muttered, pointing to the rubber ring. Their hands brushed as Hannah handed it over, a momentary connection neither acknowledged. Later, Hannah sat cross-legged on the floor with Grace, demonstrating how to loop shoelaces with patient hands. "Like bunny ears," she explained, her voice gentler than she'd intended, surprising herself. Grace's tongue poked out in concentration as she mimicked the movements, her small fingers working determinedly. At dinner, they gathered around the old oak table for the first time as a makeshift family. The twins perched on cushions to reach their plates, feet dangling above the floor. Silverware clinked in the awkward silence that stretched between bites. "The pasta's better this time," Glory offered quietly, her rare comment making Grace giggle and lightening the mood momentarily. After the girls went upstairs, their footsteps pattering overhead, Hannah cornered her father in his study. Books lined the walls like silent witnesses as the air grew heavy with unspoken words and years of tension. "We need to talk about DeMarcus Langston," she said firmly, planting her feet. Benjamin's shoulders stiffened visibly under his cardigan. That case was decided years ago. "An innocent man spent 12 years in prison, Dad. Your ruling—" "The evidence presented at the time," he began defensively, "was circumstantial at best," Hannah cut in, her lawyer's instincts flaring. "You knew it then. You know it now." Benjamin turned away, running his fingers along the spines of his well-worn law books, seeking comfort in their familiar texture. "Some decisions can't be undone, Hannah. Can't be, or won't be." The question hung between them like smoke after a fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. That night, Hannah lay in her childhood bed, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling from the streetlight outside. The memory of her last courtroom appearance before her father played in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. Her passionate defense of Langston's appeal, Benjamin's stone-faced denial, the sound of her briefcase slamming as she stormed out, vowing never to return. Through the thin wall, she heard Grace and Glory whispering and giggling, their nighttime ritual. Their voices carried clearly in the quiet house, a reminder of how little privacy these old walls provided. "Do you think Mama Hannah will help us make pancakes tomorrow?" Grace asked, hope threading through her sleepy voice. "Shh," Glory responded, followed by more muffled giggles and the rustle of blankets. Hannah's breath caught in her throat at the unexpected title, her heart performing a strange little somersault in her chest. The Sunday morning sun painted golden streaks across the overgrown garden. Hannah stood at the kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands, watching Grace and Glory chase butterflies through the dewy grass. Their bare feet left tiny prints in the wet lawn, and their giggles floated through the morning air like music, a melody that had been missing from this house for far too long. "Be careful not to slip," she called through the open window, surprising herself with the maternal tone in her voice. She hadn't realized how naturally those protective words would come. The past week had transformed the old house. Where silence once echoed, now laughter bounced off the walls. Every day brought new discoveries. Benjamin had cleared out his stuffy home office, converting it into a reading nook with soft pillows and a child-sized bookshelf filled with colorful stories waiting to be explored. The girls' artwork now decorated the refrigerator. Stick figures holding hands, rainbow-colored houses, and hearts everywhere, bringing warmth to the once sterile kitchen. In the evenings, Benjamin would settle into his armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he read bedtime stories. His voice, usually so stern in court, grew soft and animated, rising and falling with each adventure on the page. Glory particularly loved when he did different voices for each character, her eyes widening with delight at his silly troll growls and princess whispers. One afternoon, Hannah found Glory carefully braiding Grace's hair in the sunroom, her small fingers working with surprising skill. The sunlight caught the subtle differences between them. Glory's more serious expression, the careful precision in her movements. "Mama used to do this," Glory had whispered, and Hannah felt her heart crack a little. Those simple words carried the weight of so much loss, yet also showed the precious memories the girls still carried. The kitchen became their favorite gathering spot. Despite Hannah's protests about the mess, Benjamin insisted on teaching the girls to bake cookies. Flour dusted every surface, and the first batch came out black on the bottom, setting off the smoke detector and sending them all into fits of laughter. But when Glory accidentally dumped flour all over Benjamin's pristine suit pants, his deep belly laugh filled the kitchen. Hannah froze in the doorway. She hadn't heard that sound since she was a child, and it transported her back to happier times she'd almost forgotten. At the local bookstore, Hannah let the girls each pick out a journal. Grace chose one with butterflies on the cover, while Glory selected a deep blue one with silver stars that seemed to reflect her more thoughtful nature. "For your thoughts and dreams," Hannah had explained, showing them how to write their names on the first page. Glory had traced each letter carefully, her tongue poking out in concentration. In the backyard, Benjamin created a small herb garden. His hands, usually occupied with legal briefs, now demonstrated how to dig holes and plant tiny seedlings. "Gentle now," he'd instruct, helping Glory pat the soil around a baby basil plant. "Everything needs care to grow strong." The girls nodded solemnly, understanding the deeper meaning in his simple gardening lesson. That evening, Benjamin sat in his favorite chair, reading Charlotte's Web aloud. The girls snuggled against him, one on each side, their eyes growing heavy as his voice wove the story. Their breathing deepened, and soon both were fast asleep. Grace's head on his shoulder, Glory curled against his side, her small hand clutching the fabric of his shirt even in sleep. Hannah stood in the shadowed hallway watching. Tears welled in her eyes as she observed this tender scene. Her father, the stern judge, now a gentle guardian to these precious girls. The man she had been so angry with for so long was transforming before her eyes. She wiped her eyes quickly and walked away before Benjamin could notice her presence, her heart full of emotions she wasn't ready to name, but that felt dangerously close to forgiveness. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, its deep resonance echoing through the silent estate. Hannah tossed and turned in her bed, sleep evading her despite her exhaustion. The old house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds from her childhood that now felt strangely haunting and accusatory. Finally giving up on rest, she padded barefoot down the dark hallway. The polished wooden floors were cool beneath her feet, each step bringing back memories of sneaking around as a teenager. She found herself drawn to her father's study, a room that had once been strictly off-limits during her youth, a sanctuary she'd been punished for entering more than once. The door hinges whispered as she pushed it open. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the leather-bound law books and case files that lined the walls. Her father's heavy oak desk dominated the room, a symbol of his authority that had always intimidated her, even now as a grown woman with her own legal career. A flash of metal caught her eye. The bottom drawer, usually locked tight, was slightly ajar. Hannah's heart quickened. She knelt down, her fingers trembling as she pulled it open, half expecting to hear her father's stern voice behind her. There, among stacks of yellowed papers, sat a thick red folder. The label made her breath catch. Langston, DeMarcus, CR 90231. The case that had torn their family apart, the wound that had never properly healed. Hannah sank into her father's leather chair, the material creaking under her weight. She opened the file with shaking hands. Crime scene photos spilled out, along with witness statements and court transcripts. Her own memo was there too, written in passionate defense of DeMarcus's innocence. The paper was wrinkled and worn at the edges, as if frequently handled and read over many times. "Dear Dad," it began, "I've reviewed all the evidence. There are serious inconsistencies in the witness testimonies. The alibi checks out, Please, you have to look at this again. An innocent man's life depends on it." She remembered writing those words, staying up late at her desk in her first year as an attorney. The hope she'd felt then, the certainty. She'd been so sure her father would listen, would see the truth if she just presented it clearly enough, if she just tried hard enough to make him understand. The memories flooded back, the harsh fluorescent lights of his chambers, his stern face as he dismissed her concerns, the sound of her heels clicking rapidly down the courthouse hallway as she fled in tears, the way her hands had shaken as she packed her things that night, determined never to come back. Hannah placed the file in the center of his desk, deliberately leaving it open to her memo. The twins' sweet faces flashed through her mind, their trust, their hope, their vulnerability. She thought of DeMarcus Langston, who had also once been somebody's child, someone's grace or glory. The clock struck 2 as she walked back through the dark house, her mind racing with questions. She paused at the girls' room, pushing the door open just enough to see them sleeping peacefully. Grace clutched her stuffed bunny while Glory had kicked off her blankets as usual. Hannah stepped in quietly to cover Glory back up, her hand lingering for a moment on the child's shoulder. Then she slipped out, closing the door with a soft click, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Morning sunlight streamed through the study windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Benjamin stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the red folder lying open on his desk. The familiar label, Langston DeMarcus CR 90231, seemed to mock him, bringing back memories he'd tried so hard to bury. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he touched the wrinkled memo on top, yellowed with age and heavy with regret. The welcoming aroma of pancakes and coffee drifted from the kitchen, a stark contrast to the heaviness in his chest. He found Hannah there, her back to him, as she flipped a perfectly golden pancake, humming softly under her breath. The twins sat at the counter, their legs swinging in perfect rhythm as they watched her cook with wide-eyed fascination. "Girls," Benjamin said softly, clearing his throat to steady his voice, "why don't you go pick some flowers from the garden for the breakfast table?" Grace and Glory exchanged knowing glances before sliding off their stools and padding outside, their bare feet making soft sounds against the wooden floor. The kitchen fell silent except for the sizzle of butter in the pan and the distant chirping of morning birds. "You went through my files," Benjamin said. It wasn't a question, but a heavy statement of fact. Hannah turned off the stove with deliberate slowness and faced him, her jaw set in a familiar way that reminded him so much of her mother. "You kept it all these years." "Hannah, no." She cut him off, her voice tight with emotion, fingers gripping the spatula like a shield. "I need to know why. Why didn't you even look at the evidence? A man spent 15 years in prison, Dad. 15 years of his life just gone." Benjamin gripped the counter, his knuckles white against the marble surface. "I was afraid," he whispered, the admission costing him dearly. Afraid of what? Of being wrong. Of admitting that the system I believed in, that I dedicated my life to, could fail so completely. He looked up, meeting her eyes, seeing the hurt child she'd once been. "I've spent every day since then living with that choice, carrying it like a stone in my heart." Hannah's anger seemed to deflate slightly, her shoulders dropping. "And now? Now?" Benjamin glanced toward the garden where the twins' laughter floated through the open window like wind chimes. "Now I'm trying to be the man you wanted me to be. The man they need me to be." His voice cracked with emotion. "I know it's not enough, but I'm trying, Hannah. God help me, I'm trying." The silence between them felt different now, less sharp, more weighted with understanding and years of unspoken words. Before either could speak again, the back door burst open with a happy squeak of hinges. Grace and Glory tumbled in, their cheeks flushed from the morning air, clutching wildflowers in their small fists. "Papa Ben," Grace called out excitedly, holding up a slightly crushed daisy, its petals bent but beautiful. "Look what we found." Glory approached more quietly, her steps measured and careful, offering Hannah a tiny purple flower with reverent hands. "It's pretty like you, Mama Hannah," she whispered, the words barely audible but filling the room. Hannah's eyes widened at the name, and she looked at her father, surprise and something else, something warm and hopeful, crossing her face. The tension of moments before gave way to something softer, something unfinished but healing, like the first rays of sun after a storm. That evening, Benjamin sat in the girls' bedroom, watching them draw with their new crayons, the scratch of wax on paper, a soothing sound. Grace proudly held up her latest masterpiece, a family portrait drawn with all the beautiful imperfection of a child's love. 4 figures held hands across the page: Papa Ben, Mama Hannah, and 2 small girls in matching blue dresses, their crayon smiles reaching from ear to ear. Benjamin touched the drawing gently, tears welling in his eyes as he looked at the simple, honest love depicted on the paper. The Langston file lay untouched in his study, but its weight remained, a reminder of the past and the long road to redemption ahead. Yet somehow, surrounded by the quiet love in this room, that burden felt a little lighter to bear. Morning light filtered through the dining room windows as Benjamin placed the worn legal binder on the table. Its edges were frayed, and yellow sticky notes poked out from various sections. Hannah stood by the coffee maker, watching her father with guarded eyes, her fingers tapping nervously against her ceramic mug. "Help me do this the right way," Benjamin said, his voice soft but determined. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. He ran a weathered hand across the binder's cover, as if trying to smooth away the complications that lay within. Hannah approached slowly, running her fingers along the binder's spine. "You know this won't be easy. The system doesn't like when judges bypass standard procedures. We'll be under extra scrutiny." "I know." Benjamin opened the binder, revealing meticulously organized sections. "But those girls deserve better than being shuffled through more foster homes. They've been through enough already." They settled into a rhythm, spreading papers across the mahogany table. Hannah's legal pad filled with notes as she made calls to trusted colleagues, her voice shifting between professional formality and urgent pleading. Benjamin's reading glasses perched on his nose as he scrutinized every form, occasionally sighing at particularly troublesome regulations. "We'll need character witnesses," Hannah said, hanging up her phone after a lengthy conversation. "And a solid explanation for why you invoked emergency custody. Judge Carson is going to ask tough questions." "The abuse documentation should support that," Benjamin replied, sliding over a particularly troubling report. His jaw tightened as he tapped the file. "No child should ever experience what's in these pages." In the garden, visible through the French doors, Grace and Glory played with sidewalk chalk, creating a colorful world of rainbows and flowers. Every so often they'd peek inside, their small faces curious about the intense discussion happening between Hannah and Benjamin. Glory would stare the longest, her observant eyes missing nothing. "What about my involvement?" Hannah asked, tapping her pen against the legal pad. "Having a civil rights attorney backing this could help, but it could also look like nepotism," Benjamin finished. He removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. "We need to be transparent about everything. No shortcuts, no special favors." Around lunchtime, the girls wandered in, drawn by the unusual quiet. Glory noticed Hannah's laptop open to a legal document and tugged at her sleeve, her small face pinched with worry. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darted between Hannah and the computer screen, fear evident in her expression. Hannah's heart clenched. She closed the laptop and pulled Glory onto her lap. Grace pressed against her side, both girls seeking reassurance, their bodies tense with familiar anxiety. "We're working on something important," Hannah explained carefully. "Something to help keep you safe. We want to make sure you have a good home." Benjamin watched the interaction, his expression softening. The sight of his daughter, once so angry and distant, now holding these children with such tenderness, stirred something deep within him. He caught himself wondering when Hannah had become so nurturing, so protective. That evening, as Hannah tucked the girls into their beds, Glory's small hand caught her sleeve again. The bedside lamp cast a gentle glow across her serious face. "Will we get to stay with you forever?" she asked, her dark eyes wide and hopeful, yet guarded, as if preparing herself for disappointment. Hannah felt her throat tighten. She smoothed Glory's hair back gently, taking a moment to find words that wouldn't promise too much. "We're trying," she whispered, then quietly closed the door behind her, blinking back unexpected tears as she stepped into the hallway. The bell above Savannah Scoops tinkled as Benjamin held the door open. The sweet smell of waffle cones and sugar filled the air, bringing back memories he'd long tucked away. Grace and Glory stepped inside, their eyes wide at the colorful array of ice cream flavors displayed behind gleaming glass, like jewels waiting to be discovered. "This is where I used to bring Hannah when she was your age," Benjamin said softly, his hand resting gently on Glory's shoulder. He felt her small frame relax slightly beneath his touch. Hannah traced her finger along the counter's edge, the cool marble familiar under her fingertips. "You always let me get 2 scoops of chocolate chip," she remembered, her voice carrying a hint of nostalgia that surprised even her. "And you'd always tell me not to tell Mom." "Can we try the blue one?" Grace asked, pressing her nose against the glass, leaving a small smudge that matched her excitement. "Bubblegum," the teenage server explained with a friendly smile, her ponytail bouncing as she leaned forward. "Want a sample? It's our most popular with kids." The girls nodded eagerly, accepting tiny plastic spoons with outstretched hands. Their faces lit up at the first taste, eyes closing in pure delight. "It's like candy," Glory exclaimed, showing more animation than she had in days. Her voice rang clear and bright in the small shop. Hannah pulled out her phone, capturing their delight in a quick series of photos. Benjamin ordered 4 cones, bubblegum for the twins, chocolate chip for Hannah, and vanilla for himself. They sat at a small round table by the window, sunlight streaming in and casting warm patterns across their faces. The first whispers started when Mrs. Patterson from the library walked past, doing a double take at the sight of Judge Cole with 2 black children. Her steps faltered before she hurried away, already reaching for her phone with fingers that seemed eager to spread the news. More locals passed by. Some smiled uncertainly, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Others stared openly, making no attempt to hide their surprise. The girls didn't notice, too absorbed in their treat, but Hannah's shoulders tensed with each passing minute, her spine straightening like a shield. Gerald Prescott's entrance made the small bell sound harsh, almost like a warning. The former law clerk's eyes narrowed at the scene before him, his mouth twisting into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well, well," he drawled, approaching their table with deliberate steps. "Strange times we're living in, wouldn't you say, Judge? Quite a different look for you." Hannah's ice cream cone hit the table with a crack, chocolate chips splattering across the surface. "Excuse me?" Her voice was razor-sharp, cutting through the cheerful atmosphere. "Now, Hannah." Gerald raised his hands, false innocence in his tone that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just making conversation. Your father's always been traditional in his views. This is quite the change." The twins stopped eating, picking up on the tension that suddenly filled the air like static. Glory pressed closer to Benjamin's side, her small body seeking protection. Grace's eyes darted between the adults, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. "I think it's time we go," Benjamin said quietly, standing and gathering napkins with steady hands. He positioned himself between the girls and Gerald's scrutiny, his back straight and shoulders squared. "Come on, sweethearts," Hannah added, her tone gentle despite her rigid posture. She wiped a spot of blue from Grace's chin. "Let's head home. We can finish these in the car." They walked out quickly, leaving Gerald's knowing smirk behind. The drive home was silent, except for the occasional sound of melting ice cream dripping onto paper napkins and small sighs from the back seat. That evening, Benjamin sat alone on the wraparound porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. His vanilla cone had melted, untouched, leaving sticky trails down his fingers that reminded him of tears. Above him, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, distant witnesses to his troubled thoughts. "Too late to change their minds," he whispered to himself, the words barely audible above the evening chorus of crickets. "But not too late to change yours." Hannah stood in the kitchen, morning sunlight streaming through the windows as she poured coffee into her favorite blue mug. The phone's sharp ring made her jump, splashing hot liquid onto the counter and nearly onto her sleeve. "Hannah Cole speaking," she answered, dabbing at the spill with a dishcloth, her heart already beating a little faster. The court clerk's voice was crisp and formal. "Ms. Cole, regarding petition case GC 2023-456, the guardianship request for Grace and Glory Williams. The court has accepted the filing and scheduled a hearing for July 15th, 2 weeks from today." Hannah's grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles turning white. "Thank you, that's—" "I should also inform you," the clerk continued, cutting her off, "that per protocol, Child Protective Services has been notified and will be conducting their own investigation prior to the hearing. Expect a home visit within the next few days." The coffee grew cold as Hannah found Benjamin in his study. He sat behind his heavy oak desk, already dressed in a pressed shirt and tie despite the early hour, as if armor against the day's uncertainties. 2 weeks, she said simply, leaning against the doorframe. "And CPS is involved now. They'll be coming to inspect the house, interview us all." Benjamin nodded slowly, pulling out a legal pad. His silver pen hovered over the yellow paper, catching the light. "I need to prepare my statement. I should outline our case thoroughly." "Dad," Hannah said, sitting across from him, her voice softer than usual, "this isn't about precedents or legal frameworks. You need to tell them why these girls belong here, with us, why this is their home now." "I know the law, Hannah. I can cite—" "No." She reached across and took the pen from his hand, their fingers briefly touching. "Tell them about Grace's giggles when you make pancake faces. Tell them how Glory watches the birds in the garden every morning, naming each one. Make them see what we see." Down the hall, Grace and Glory sat cross-legged on their bedroom floor, a glossy catalog spread between them, pages dog-eared at the corners. Grace pointed to a stuffed giraffe with long, floppy ears, its plush fabric looking soft enough to cuddle. "When we get to stay forever," she whispered, her small finger circling the picture, "maybe Papa Ben will let us pick one. We could name him Spots." Glory traced the giraffe's spotted pattern with her finger, her face more serious than her sister's. "You think we really get to stay? Forever, ever?" Hannah passed by their open door just then, catching the exchange. Her throat tightened as she watched them plan their future with such innocent hope, unaware of the legal battle brewing around them. In his study, Benjamin pulled out fresh paper. He began writing, then crossed out the formal language with frustrated strokes. Started again. His eyes drifted to the old family photo on his desk. Hannah at 7, her mother Sarah smiling, his younger self looking proud and certain of everything. He turned the frame face down and gripped his pen tighter, determined to find the right words, the honest words, to keep his new family together against whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning air hung heavy with humidity as Benjamin's car pulled up to the courthouse steps. Camera flashes sparked like lightning through the gray dawn. Grace clutched her stuffed bunny tighter, its worn ears pressed against her chest, while Glory pressed closer to Hannah's side, her small fingers gripping the fabric of Hannah's blazer. "There's so many people," Grace whispered, her eyes wide behind the car window, fogging the glass with her breath. Benjamin adjusted his tie, his hands trembling slightly. The silk felt too tight around his neck. "Stay close to Hannah, girls. I'll walk ahead and clear a path." As they made their way up the stone steps, reporters swarmed like hungry gulls, calling out questions that cut through the morning chill. "Judge Cole, why these children specifically? Is this related to your past rulings on family court cases? What does your daughter think about your sudden interest in fostering?" Hannah's sharp voice cut through. "No comments. Please step back." She guided the twins through the heavy wooden doors, her arm protective around their shoulders, her eyes daring anyone to come closer. Inside courtroom B, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators. Whispers rustled like autumn leaves across the room. Judge Maria Ramos, a woman with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, called the hearing to order with a voice that commanded instant respect. The twins sat between Hannah and Benjamin in the front row, their matching blue dresses pristine and pressed, their small legs swinging nervously above the floor. When Benjamin took the stand, the usual confident set of his shoulders was gone. He looked older, more human, with lines etched deeper around his eyes. His voice, normally so commanding, came out soft but clear, resonating in the hushed courtroom. Your Honor, 30 years ago, I began my career believing justice was black and white. Rules were rules. Evidence was evidence. He paused, looking at Hannah, meeting her eyes for what felt like the first time in years. When my daughter brought me concerns about the Langston case, I dismissed them. I saw a young idealist trying to upend the system. I didn't see a daughter trying to show her father a better way. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter's fingers stilled on her keyboard. A pencil dropped somewhere in the back, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I sent men to prison because the system said they belonged there. I didn't look deeper. I didn't question. I didn't see the children left behind, the families torn apart. His voice cracked, betraying the emotion he'd kept locked away for decades. But these girls, Grace and Glory, they made me see. They showed me what justice really means. It means love. It means protection. It means admitting when you're wrong and trying to do better. Grace reached for Glory's hand, their fingers intertwining like they'd done since they were babies. Hannah blinked back tears, her professional composure crumbling at the edges. I'm not asking for forgiveness for my past rulings. I'm asking for a chance to do right by these children. They saved me from becoming the very thing I once condemned, someone too afraid to change. Judge Ramos leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the light. And you understand, given your history, this request will face intense scrutiny. Yes, Your Honor, but I'm ready to face it for them. Benjamin's gaze never wavered, steady with newfound purpose. The judge nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I'll review the testimony and supporting documents. We'll reconvene for my decision. Her gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to seal their fate. Outside, the reporters surged forward like a wave breaking against the shore. Benjamin stepped in front of the girls as cameras flashed, his body a shield. Hannah wrapped her coat around them both, hurrying them to the car. The drive home was quiet, filled with unspoken hopes and fears, but Benjamin reached back and squeezed Glory's hand. She squeezed back, her small fingers warm against his, and for the first time, he felt like they were truly a family, whatever tomorrow might bring. The evening sun painted the old estate in shades of amber and gold. Spanish moss swayed gently in the breeze as Benjamin's car crunched up the gravel driveway. Despite the weight of the day's emotions, there was a lightness in the air, something fresh and hopeful that seemed to whisper of new beginnings. Hannah spread out a worn quilted blanket on the lawn, smoothing the corners with careful hands. The faded fabric held years of memories in its stitches. I remember this blanket, she said softly, running her fingers over a small coffee stain in one corner. Mom used to pack it for our picnics. She'd get so mad when you'd spill your lemonade on it. Benjamin nodded, his throat tight as he arranged citronella candles in a protective circle around their sitting area. The familiar scent of citrus and summer filled the air, transporting him back through decades. Grace and Glory kicked off their shoes, their small feet leaving impressions in the dewy grass as they chased each other around the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Papa Ben!" Grace called out, her voice bubbling with excitement as she pointed to a flickering light in the gathering dusk. "What's that?" "It's like tiny stars." "Fireflies," Benjamin smiled, setting down the matches and straightening up. "We used to catch them in jars when Hannah was little. Your mom would poke holes in the lid so they could breathe." Hannah's eyes softened at the memory, a gentle smile touching her lips. She showed the girls how to cup their hands gently around the glowing insects, then release them back into the evening air. "That's it, just like that," she encouraged. Glory's delighted giggle echoed across the lawn as a firefly landed briefly on her nose, its tiny light illuminating her wide-eyed wonder. Benjamin built a small fire in the garden pit, carefully arranging the kindling before striking a match. Soon, they roasted marshmallows on long sticks, watching them bubble and brown in the dancing flames. Sticky white sugar-coated chins and fingers, leaving a trail of sweetness everywhere they touched. Hannah told them about the time she'd tried to camp in the backyard with her father, only to run inside screaming when an owl hooted nearby. I did not scream, Benjamin protested, but his eyes crinkled with laughter as he wiped marshmallow from his chin. That's revisionist history. Oh, yes, you did, Hannah countered, grinning and poking his shoulder playfully. You jumped higher than I did. Mom had to come out and calm us both down. His deep laugh rang out, genuine and free, until tears streamed down his face. The twins giggled along, though they didn't quite understand the joke, simply delighting in the contagious joy. The sound of their shared laughter drifted up into the darkening sky, mingling with the smoke from their little fire. As the stars began to appear, twinkling one by one in the velvet sky, Glory curled up closer to Hannah, her small hand finding Hannah's larger one. Can we stay forever? She asked quietly, her voice small but hopeful. Grace looked up too, hope shining in her eyes as she waited for the answer. Benjamin met their gaze across the dying embers of the fire, his voice gentle but firm. I hope so. With all my heart. I'm doing everything I can to make that happen. The evening wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Fireflies continued their dance among the trees as the girls grew sleepy, their eyelids growing heavy with each passing minute. Eventually, they drifted off on the porch swing, their small bodies curled together under a soft blanket, peaceful in the growing darkness. Benjamin lifted them carefully, one at a time, carrying them inside to their beds. He tucked the covers around them, pausing to brush the hair from their foreheads before quietly leaving the room. When he returned to the porch, he found Hannah standing at the railing, looking out over the shadowy garden. He reached for the porch light switch and paused. I never knew a place could feel like this, he whispered to his daughter, his voice thick with emotion, like home again. The late morning sun warmed the wraparound porch of the estate. Grace and Glory sat cross-legged on the wooden boards, colored pencils scattered around them as they drew pictures of butterflies and flowers. Glory's careful strokes created delicate wing patterns, while Grace added splashes of bright colors to her garden scene. Benjamin worked in the garden nearby, carefully trimming the overgrown hedges that lined the property. His sleeves were rolled up and sweat dotted his forehead as he worked, the rhythmic snip of the shears oddly comforting in the quiet morning. Hannah lounged in a wicker chair, reading a legal brief but glancing up occasionally to watch the peaceful scene, a small smile playing at her lips whenever one of the girls showed her a completed drawing. The crunch of tires on gravel shattered their quiet morning. A white government-issue sedan wound its way up the long driveway, dust trailing behind it like an ominous cloud. Benjamin straightened, setting down his gardening shears, wiping his palms against his pants. Hannah's spine stiffened as she recognized the Child Protective Services logo on the car door, her fingers tightening around the edges of her document. Caseworker Elise Monroe emerged from the vehicle, her heels clicking purposefully on the gravel. She wore a crisp navy blazer despite the Georgia heat, her brown hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to pull at her features. Her smile was professional but didn't reach her eyes as she introduced herself, clipboard already in hand. I'm here for a mandatory welfare check, she announced, already pulling out her tablet and swiping through screens. Standard procedure following your guardianship petition. I'll need to see everything. Inside, Elise moved through the house like a detective, photographing rooms and making notes about everything from the girls' bedroom setup to the contents of the refrigerator. Her questions were precise and methodical, each one feeling like a test they hadn't prepared for. How many square feet is the living space? Click. What's your protocol for emergency medical care? Click. Show me where you store cleaning supplies. Click. Are medications kept locked away from children? Her stylus tapped against the screen with each response. She interviewed Benjamin in his study, her voice carrying faintly through the old walls. Your history of strict sentencing in juvenile cases raises concerns about your capacity for nurturing care, Your Honor. The committee will want to know how you've adjusted your approach to discipline. Her tone suggested she already had her doubts. Hannah's interview came next, conducted in the kitchen. Your frequent travel for cases could create attachment issues. The girls have already experienced significant abandonment trauma. How do you plan to maintain stability when your career demands mobility? Hannah's carefully composed answers seemed to disappear into Elise's tablet without making an impression. Throughout the inspection, Elise observed the twins' interactions with both adults, noting how Glory sought out Hannah's hand during tense moments, how her observant eyes followed the caseworker's every move. She watched how Grace looked to Benjamin for reassurance, whispering questions that he answered with gentle patience. Her pen scratched against her notepad constantly, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard to Hannah's ears. As the visit drew to a close, Elise delivered her final blow. Standing in the foyer, she pulled out a fresh document, her voice matter-of-fact. I should inform you that the Whitman family from Connecticut has submitted an adoption petition for both girls. They're pre-approved, with an excellent home study and considerable resources. The husband is a pediatrician, the wife a former teacher. The agency is giving their application serious consideration as a permanent placement. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Benjamin's face remained carefully neutral, but his hands clenched slightly at his sides, knuckles whitening. Hannah's jaw tightened as she processed the implications, her legal mind already racing through potential challenges and strategies. After Elise departed, Benjamin stood at the kitchen sink, his shoulders tense as he stared out at the garden where they'd caught fireflies just 2 nights before, jars glowing with magic in the twilight. Hannah sat heavily at the oak table, absently turning over the glossy CPS pamphlet Elise had left behind, its cheerful stock photos of smiling families now seeming like a cruel joke. Small footsteps padded into the kitchen. Grace looked between them, her voice small but clear in the heavy silence. Are we going to have to leave again? Behind her, Glory lingered in the doorway, her eyes wide and watchful, already preparing herself for the worst. Neither Benjamin nor Hannah found the words to answer. The steady patter of rain against the study's windows matched the somber mood inside. Benjamin and Hannah sat hunched over his mahogany desk, their faces illuminated by a single brass lamp as they examined the thick stack of documents Elise had left behind. Coffee cups sat cold and forgotten beside them, the bitter aroma a faint reminder of hours spent poring over paperwork. Perfect credit scores, multiple properties, private school connections, Hannah muttered, flipping through the Whitford's adoption petition. Her finger traced down another page, leaving a slight indentation on the crisp paper. They've donated over $500,000 to children's charities in the past 3 years alone. Everything looks picture perfect on paper. Benjamin leaned back in his leather chair, running a hand through his silver hair. The chair creaked under his weight as he exhaled deeply. They have a beach house in Martha's Vineyard, a winter home in Aspen. His voice was hollow, defeated. We don't stand a chance, not in their world, not against this kind of wealth and influence. They've never even met the girls, Hannah snapped, throwing down the papers with enough force to scatter several across the desk. They don't know that Glory hums when she's drawing, or that Grace always saves half her dessert for her sister. They don't know anything real about them, they're just collecting children like they collect vacation homes. From the darkened hallway came a tiny creak. Neither adult noticed the 2 small shadows on the stairs, listening intently, their nightgowns ghostly white against the dark wood banister. Hannah stood and paced the study, her legal mind working. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against her thigh as she walked. We could use your confession from the hearing, show how this has transformed you, how invested you are emotionally. The court loves redemption stories. We need to humanize this case, make it about more than just resources. It's risky, Benjamin warned, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the desk. They could see it as manipulation. The wrong judge might think I'm using my position, my knowledge of the system. Everything's risky right now, Hannah replied, her voice tight with worry. She stopped pacing and braced her hands on the edge of the desk. But doing nothing guarantees we lose them. Later that night, as Hannah tucked the girls into bed, Glory's small hand caught her sleeve. Are they going to take us away? Her dark eyes were wide with fear in the dim light of her butterfly nightlight, her voice barely above a whisper. Hannah's throat tightened painfully. She smoothed Glory's hair back, forcing a smile she didn't feel. We'll figure it out, sweetie. I promise we're doing everything we can. She pulled the covers up to Glory's chin. Try to sleep now, things always look brighter in the morning. After both girls finally drifted off, Benjamin stood alone in the hallway. The rain had softened to a whisper outside, tapping gently at the windows like a hesitant visitor. He stared at their partially open door, watching the gentle rise and fall of their sleeping forms. The nightlight cast butterfly-shaped shadows across their peaceful faces. "I will not lose them," he murmured, his jaw set with determination. Then he turned and walked back to his study, the familiar weight of his legal binder in his hands, his footsteps purposeful on the hardwood floor. This was one case he couldn't afford to lose. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 deep, resonant chimes. The estate settled into its familiar midnight creaks and whispers. Benjamin had just dozed off in his study when a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. He bolted upright, knocking over a stack of legal papers that scattered across the floor. His heart pounded wildly in his chest as he sprinted down the hallway toward the girls' room. The screaming continued, raw and terrified, cutting through the night like a knife. Benjamin burst through the door to find Grace sitting straight up in bed, her eyes wide with worry, her small hands clutching the blanket tightly. But it was Glory who was screaming, thrashing violently against her sheets, her small body rigid with fear, trapped in some unseen horror. "Don't lock me in," Glory shrieked, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Please don't shut the door. Let me out. Let me out." Her little fists pounded against invisible barriers. Benjamin rushed to her side, gathering her trembling form into his arms. She was drenched in sweat, her pajamas clinging to her skin, her dark hair plastered to her forehead. "Shh, sweetheart. I'm here. You're safe," he murmured, rocking her gently back and forth. "I've got you. Nothing can hurt you now." Hannah appeared in the doorway, her face pale with concern, her hair disheveled from sleep. She flicked on the soft bedside lamp, casting a warm glow across the room. Glory's screams had subsided to choked sobs against Benjamin's chest, her tiny body still shaking uncontrollably. "It's the basement," Grace whispered, clutching her stuffed bunny to her chest like a shield. "The one with the metal door." Her voice was small but clear in the quiet room, steady despite the fear in her eyes. "They used to lock us down there when we were bad, or when they were mad, sometimes just because." Benjamin's arms tightened around Glory protectively, a surge of anger rising in his throat. Hannah sank onto Grace's bed, pulling the other twin close against her side. The horror of what Grace was saying settled over them like a heavy blanket, suffocating and impossible to ignore. "How long?" Hannah asked softly, stroking Grace's hair with gentle fingers. "5 days, maybe more," Grace replied, her eyes fixed on some distant memory. "It was dark. So dark you couldn't see your hand. Glory got real sick after. She cried and cried until she couldn't anymore." Glory's sobs had quieted to hiccups, but her grip on Benjamin's shirt remained fierce, her small fingers twisted in the fabric as if afraid he might disappear. He stood carefully, keeping her cradled against him. "I'm taking her to the recliner," he said quietly. "We'll stay there tonight. She needs to know she's not alone." In the living room, Benjamin settled into the old leather recliner, adjusting Glory so she could rest comfortably against his chest. Her breathing gradually steadied, though occasional tremors still ran through her small frame. He wrapped his arms around her, creating a protective cocoon against the memories that haunted her. The night stretched on endlessly. Benjamin didn't sleep. He kept watch, feeling Glory's heart rate slowly return to normal beneath his protective embrace. His shirt was wet with her tears, but he didn't move an inch, determined to be the safety she needed. As the first hints of dawn began painting the sky outside in soft pinks and golds, Hannah padded quietly into the room. She draped a soft blanket over them both and set a steaming cup of coffee on the side table. Then she sank into the couch nearby, her eyes red-rimmed from her own sleepless vigil. They sat together in the growing light, neither speaking. The weight of what they'd learned hung between them. The only sound was Glory's now peaceful breathing and the distant call of morning birds welcoming a new day. Sunlight crept through the study windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Hannah paced back and forth, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless night they'd all endured after Glory's nightmare. Her shoulders were tense, her movements sharp with worry. In the living room, Grace and Glory sat cross-legged on the floor, their crayons scratching quietly against paper. Benjamin brought them apple slices arranged neatly on a blue ceramic plate, and watched as they carefully colored within the lines of their coloring books. Glory's tongue poked out slightly in concentration as she worked on a picture of a butterfly. "What do you mean, temporary emotional housing?" Hannah's sharp whisper carried from the study. She grabbed a legal pad, scribbling furiously as she listened. "They're not inventory in a warehouse, David. These are children, real children with real feelings." Her source, a former clerk who'd worked under Benjamin for years, spoke carefully. The Whitfords' petition had gained significant traction. Their references included 2 state senators and a prominent child welfare advocate who had written glowing recommendations. The court viewed Benjamin's custody as a well-intentioned but ultimately temporary arrangement, a stopgap rather than a solution. Hannah's knuckles turned white around the phone. And Judge Ramos? Where does she stand? She held her breath, hoping for some glimmer of hope. The answer made her sink into the leather chair, the springs creaking under her weight. The judge was impressed by the Whitfords' stability, their resources, their pristine background checks. The scales were already tipping and not in their favor. It felt like fighting against a current that was determined to sweep the girls away. Benjamin appeared in the doorway, reading the defeat in Hannah's posture. "What can we do?" His voice was quiet but firm. She ended the call and rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been building all morning. "They're calling this temporary emotional housing, like we're just storage." Her voice cracked with anger, as if what we're providing isn't a real home. Benjamin's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. "I could speak with Maria, with Judge Ramos. Off the record. We've known each other for years." "Dad, no." Hannah stood up sharply, her chair rolling backward. "We can't risk any appearance of impropriety. It would only hurt our case. They'd use it against us in a heartbeat." They spent the next hours gathering evidence, spreading papers across the desk like battle plans. Hannah pulled together school attendance records, showing the girls hadn't missed a single day since arriving. Benjamin collected photos, Glory helping in the garden with dirt smudged on her cheeks, Grace reading on the porch swing with afternoon light in her hair. They found doctor's notes documenting the twins' improved sleep patterns and decreased anxiety, concrete proof of their progress. "Look at this," Hannah said, holding up a drawing Glory had made earlier that week. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a chimney puffing smoke. "My family" was written across the top in wobbly letters, each letter a different color. Benjamin studied the picture, his throat tight with emotion. Will it be enough? The question hung in the air, heavy with doubt. Hannah didn't answer. She couldn't. The weight of what they were up against pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. The Whitfords represented everything the system typically wanted: wealth, connections, a spotless record. Their love for the girls, their growing bond, their genuine care. None of that showed up neatly on paper or in court-approved metrics. She walked to the study door and closed it quietly, leaning back against the solid wood. Tears welled in her eyes as the reality of their situation crashed over her. "We're running out of time," she whispered to herself, wiping away a tear before it could fall. In the living room, Grace's laughter floated through the door as Glory showed her a newly finished drawing. The sound of their happiness, so pure and unaware of the storm brewing around them, made Hannah's heart ache even more. They deserved stability, not another upheaval in their young lives. The evening sun cast long shadows through the estate's windows, but inside, the atmosphere felt even darker. Benjamin sat at his desk, mechanically reviewing legal documents, his eyes scanning the words without truly absorbing their meaning. Meanwhile, Hannah typed furiously on her laptop in the living room, the harsh clicking of keys punctuating the heavy silence. Neither spoke about tomorrow's hearing. They didn't need to. The weight of what was coming hung in the air like an invisible storm cloud. Upstairs, Grace and Glory worked quietly on the floor of their bedroom, surrounded by construction paper, markers, and glue. Their small fingers moved with purpose and care. They'd seen this before. The tense faces, the quiet conversations, the way adults tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. 6 foster homes had taught them what goodbye looked like. The signs were unmistakable: and their hearts recognized the familiar ache of impending separation. "Make Papa Ben's heart extra big," Glory whispered, passing a red crayon to Grace. Their thank you book lay spread between them, pages filled with stick figures holding hands, rainbow-colored houses, and carefully traced handprints. Each drawing was a piece of their hearts, committed to paper. Grace drew a wobbly heart, then added another right beside it. "Should we put sparkles?" she asked, her voice small, but determined to make this gift perfect. Glory nodded, reaching for the glitter glue they'd found in an old craft box. She carefully wrote, "We love you" in her best handwriting, each letter slightly crooked but earnest. Her tongue poked out between her lips as she concentrated on making each stroke just right. In the kitchen, Hannah's coffee had gone cold, forgotten in the midst of preparation. She stared at her legal pad, crossing out lines and rewriting them, searching desperately for the perfect words that might change tomorrow's outcome. Benjamin's pen scratched against paper in the study, preparing words that felt hollow against the weight of what was coming. Neither could find comfort in their usual routines. The girls worked late into the night until Hannah finally insisted they sleep. With reluctant sighs, they left their creation on the kitchen table, a handmade book bound with yarn, decorated with stickers and hope. It was their final plea, crafted with all the love their small hearts could express. Morning arrived too quickly, the sunrise seeming almost cruel in its beauty. The sound of tires on gravel came just after breakfast, when the dishes were barely cleared. Elise Monroe's white CPS vehicle pulled up, followed by another car with 2 additional agents. The moment they'd all been dreading had arrived with brutal punctuality. "No, please!" Grace's scream pierced the air as she wrapped her arms around Hannah's waist, her entire body trembling. Glory threw her stuffed bunny across the room in a rare display of outward anger, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. "Don't let them take us," Grace begged, her fingers clutching Hannah's shirt so tightly that the fabric stretched. "We'll be good. We promise. We'll be so good." Benjamin stood frozen by the stairs, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. His face, usually composed, now reflected raw anguish as he watched helplessly while Elise approached with practiced professionalism that felt cold against the heat of their pain. "Girls," she said softly, "it's time to go." Her voice was gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument or delay. Glory ran to Benjamin, wrapping herself around his leg like she might somehow become a part of him. "Papa Ben, please! We made you cards. We love you. Don't let them take us away." The agents moved forward, gently but firmly separating the girls from their family. Their practiced hands knew how to break embraces without seeming cruel, though the result was the same. Hannah's face was streaked with tears as she watched them being led to the car, her usual composure completely abandoned. Through the rear window, 2 small faces pressed against the glass, hands splayed, eyes wide with fear and loss. Their expressions held a question no one could answer. Benjamin remained motionless on the front steps, a statue of defeat. Hannah's fingers found his, gripping tightly in a moment of shared devastation. "We're not done," she said through clenched teeth, watching the car disappear down the long driveway. Her words carried both a promise and a battle cry. The morning sun streamed through the estate's windows, but the light felt cold and empty. Benjamin stood motionless in the foyer, his hand still resting on the brass doorknob where he'd last touched it after the CPS workers left with the girls. The silence pressed against his ears like a physical weight, suffocating in its completeness. No patter of small feet on hardwood floors, no whispered conversations between sisters, no squeals of delight from the garden. The house felt like a museum now, preserved but lifeless, each room an echo chamber of what once was and what should still be. In the kitchen, abandoned breakfast plates sat with half-eaten toast, 2 glasses of orange juice still marked with tiny fingerprints. Benjamin couldn't bring himself to clean them away. Those small smudges were precious now, tangible evidence that Grace and Glory had been here, had belonged here. Hannah moved through the house like a ghost, gathering her laptop and legal files. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, her eyes red-rimmed from holding back tears. She'd fought so many battles in courtrooms, but none had ever felt this personal, this devastating. This wasn't just another case. This was family. As she walked into the girls' room to collect their remaining belongings, something caught her eye. Under Grace's pillow, a small notebook peeked out, the diary Hannah had bought her at the bookstore. Her hands trembled as she opened it, afraid of what she might find inside. Pages filled with crayon drawings spread before her, stick figures holding hands, Mama Hannah with curly hair, Papa Ben with gray scribbles on his head. Hearts and stars decorated every corner, bursting with childish joy. On one page in Grace's careful handwriting, "We don't need rich people. We already found forever." Hannah's throat tightened. She turned another page to find Glory's contribution, a detailed drawing of the estate with 4 figures standing in front. "Our home," written across the top in purple crayon. Even the usually reserved Glory had opened her heart to them, had believed this was permanent. The quiet rage began in her chest, spreading through her body like fire. These weren't just case files anymore. These weren't just statistics or legal precedents. These were their girls, their family, torn away by a system that couldn't see what was right in front of them. She found Benjamin in his study, staring out the window at the garden where just yesterday the girls had been chasing butterflies, their laughter filling the air. Without a word, she placed the diary on his desk. He looked down at the drawings, his hand shaking slightly as he touched the pages, tracing the outline of the stick figures that represented their newfound family. Hannah pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found her old law firm's number. The determination in her voice cut through the heavy silence as she dialed. Benjamin stood behind her, watching, his presence a silent affirmation of support. For the first time in years, they stood united, bound by a shared purpose stronger than their past differences. "We're not done," she said quietly, gripping the phone tightly as it rang. Her voice carried the weight of a promise, not just to herself and Benjamin, but to 2 little girls who deserved to come home. The morning light barely touched the Atlanta skyline as Hannah sat in her law office, surrounded by towers of legal documents. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten in the intensity of her focus. Red marks covered the draft motion in front of her, emergency injunction papers that needed to be perfect. She couldn't afford a single mistake, not with the twins' future hanging in the balance. "Emotional harm due to forced removal," she muttered, circling the phrase with her red pen, pressing so hard the paper nearly tore. Her colleagues, Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez, sat across from her, their own desks covered in child welfare precedents and custody battle histories. Empty takeout containers testified to their all-night effort. "The Whitfords look perfect on paper," Sarah said, rubbing her tired eyes and pushing back a strand of hair. "Wealthy, politically connected, spotless background checks. We need something stronger than just emotional attachment." Hannah pulled out Grace's diary, handling it like it was made of glass. The small, pink book with its childish handwriting held their best hope. "We have their voices, their words, their fear. The judge needs to hear what they're actually experiencing, not what looks good in a file." In Savannah, Benjamin paced his study, practicing his testimony. The hardwood floors creaked beneath his feet as he moved back and forth, his reflection catching in the window with each turn. The words caught in his throat as he reached the part about DeMarcus Langston. 20 years of guilt pressed down on his shoulders, making his voice waver. "I was wrong," he practiced saying aloud to the empty room. "I had the power to help an innocent man, and I chose my reputation instead." His voice cracked, and he paused to collect himself. "But these girls, they showed me what real justice feels like, what family feels like." Across town, in the Whitfords' pristine colonial home, Grace and Glory sat in their new bedroom. Everything was expensive and untouchable. The sheets felt too crisp, the carpet too clean. Designer clothes hung in the closet with tags still attached. They hadn't spoken much since arriving, their usual whispers silenced by the overwhelming perfection surrounding them. Glory held the framed photo Benjamin had sent with them, a simple snapshot from their backyard picnic. Hannah was laughing, Benjamin was trying not to smile, and the girls were covered in marshmallow mess. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Her small thumb traced the outline of Benjamin's face. I want to go home," Grace whispered, touching the glass, leaving a tiny fingerprint that somehow felt like an act of rebellion in this spotless house. Back in her office, Hannah worked through the night. The motion grew stronger with each revision. Documented evidence of the girl's emotional progress, expert testimonies about trauma and attachment, even Benjamin's public confession of growth and change. She fought through her exhaustion, fueled by determination and memories of the girl's laughter. "We're arguing that removing them now constitutes its own form of abuse," Marcus said, reviewing the final draft. His tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. "The precedents are on our side, even if the politics aren't." Benjamin stood in his living room that night, staring at the collection of photos on his mantel. The house felt hollow without the patter of small feet. The girl's drawings still covered his refrigerator. Their half-finished art projects sat on the coffee table, untouched since they were taken. A small stuffed bear Glory had forgotten peeked out from beneath the couch. He reached out and touched a frame holding a picture of Grace and Glory playing in the garden, their faces bright with laughter. "I'll make it right," he whispered, feeling the full weight of his past decisions as he prepared to face both his daughter and the court. This time he wouldn't choose the easy path. This time he would fight. The marble halls of the Savannah courthouse echoed with hushed whispers as people filed into courtroom B. Thomas and Michelle Whitford sat perfectly poised in tailored suits, their lawyer arranging documents with practiced precision. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches and illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Hannah gripped her legal pad, knuckles white. Her navy blazer felt too tight around her shoulders, constricting her breathing, but her voice remained steady as she reviewed her notes one final time. Benjamin sat beside her, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing his best charcoal suit, the one he used to wear on the bench during his most important cases. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his red tie. Judge Maria Ramos entered, her black robes rustling like autumn leaves. "All rise," the bailiff called out with authority. The room fell silent, the weight of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Hannah rose first, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with determined precision. She approached the bench with Grace's diary held carefully in her hands, as if carrying something infinitely precious. Her opening statement cut through the quiet like a blade, clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, this isn't about wealth or status. This isn't about who has the biggest house or the most impressive bank account. This is about two little girls who have finally found their home." She opened the diary, the pages worn from handling dog-eared at the corners. Grace Williams wrote these words 3 days ago. "I don't want a big house. I want Papa Ben to read to us and Mama Hannah to make pancakes, even when they're burnt." Soft laughter rippled through the courtroom, breaking the tension momentarily. Hannah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The Whitfords can offer material comfort. They can provide expensive clothes and private schools. But Benjamin Cole and I can offer something more precious. We can offer healing. We can offer understanding. We can offer love that doesn't depend on perfection." She detailed the girls' history of trauma, their fear of locked doors, their nightmares that came in the darkest hours of night. The Whitfords shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances as the reality of the twins' emotional needs became increasingly clear. When Benjamin took the stand, his judicial composure cracked like thin ice. Tears welled in his eyes as he spoke about Glory's nightmares, about how she would crawl into his bed at 3 a.m., seeking safety. He described Grace's quiet strength, the way she would hold her sister's hand during thunderstorms. He spoke of their laughter during messy spaghetti dinners, of bedtime stories that stretched long past their intended ending, because no one wanted the moment to end. "I was wrong about so many things in my life," he said, his voice breaking. "I was wrong about DeMarcus Langston. I was wrong about my daughter. I was wrong about what justice really means." He looked directly at Judge Ramos, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. "But I'm not wrong about this. They saved me. I didn't rescue them. They rescued me from a life of loneliness and regret. I owe them a chance at a family. We all do." The courtroom remained perfectly still, as if everyone had collectively forgotten to breathe. Even the Whitfords' lawyer stopped taking notes, his pen hovering motionless above his yellow legal pad. Judge Ramos removed her glasses, studying Benjamin carefully, her expression unreadable beneath years of judicial neutrality. "The court will take a 1-hour recess for deliberation," she announced. The gavel struck with finality, the sound reverberating through the hushed room. As people filed out, murmuring quietly among themselves, Benjamin and Hannah remained seated. Their hands found each other across the wooden table, fingers intertwined like roots seeking strength, waiting for the decision that would change all their lives forever. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Judge Maria Ramos entered courtroom B. Her black robes rustled with each deliberate step. The room fell silent, heavy with anticipation. Benjamin's hands gripped the wooden railing, his knuckles white. Hannah sat perfectly still, barely breathing, her legal notepad untouched before her. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing against the polished wood panels. Judge Ramos adjusted her reading glasses and opened the thick manila folder before her. Her expression remained neutral as she began to speak, though her eyes carried the weight of careful consideration. "In the matter of guardianship for Grace and Glory Williams, this court has carefully considered all evidence presented." She paused, looking directly at both parties. The stability of a child's emotional environment cannot be measured in material wealth or social standing. It must be evaluated through the lens of genuine connection, understanding, and healing, elements that transcend financial security. The Whitfords sat rigidly in their expensive suits, their lawyer already preparing notes for a possible appeal. Thomas Whitford's jaw clenched visibly, a muscle twitching beneath his clean-shaven skin. His wife clutched her designer handbag with trembling fingers. While the Whitford family presents an admirable petition, with considerable resources and an exemplary background check, Judge Ramos continued, her voice steady and measured. This court cannot ignore the profound emotional bonds that have formed between these children and their current caregivers. The testimony provided speaks to a relationship built on trust and genuine affection. Hannah reached for her father's hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. Benjamin's eyes remained fixed on the judge, barely blinking, his breath caught somewhere in his chest. "Therefore, it is the decision of this court to award custody to Hannah Cole." The words hung in the air for a moment before the courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Michelle Whitford's shoulders slumped slightly, while her husband's face flushed red with anger, his whispered words to his attorney sharp and clipped. Benjamin closed his eyes, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, leaving glistening trails that caught the afternoon light. Hannah pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob of relief that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. Their lawyer patted Hannah's shoulder gently, whispering congratulations, her smile genuine. Judge Ramos raised her hand for silence, commanding the room with a single gesture. "The girls will be returned to Ms. Cole's custody immediately. This court orders a smooth transition with minimal disruption to the children's emotional well-being. I expect all parties to honor this decision with the dignity these children deserve." As people began filing out of the courtroom, Hannah and Benjamin remained seated, both too overwhelmed to move. The weight of weeks of uncertainty lifted from their shoulders like a heavy fog clearing after a storm. They finally stood, gathering their belongings in silence, movements slow and deliberate as if in a dream. Walking down the courthouse steps, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting a golden glow over their faces. Hannah turned to her father, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with emotion. "We did it." Benjamin nodded silently, his tears unspoken, but his eyes said everything his voice could not. Morning sunlight streamed through the estate's tall windows, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors. Benjamin Cole stood at the front door, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a fresh blue button-down shirt. His eyes hadn't left the driveway for the past 20 minutes, scanning anxiously for any sign of movement beyond the gates. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking each moment with its solemn rhythm. Benjamin's hands fidgeted with his collar, smoothing it down for the 10th time, then adjusting his cuffs. He had spent the early hours preparing, making the girls' beds with fresh linens, setting out their favorite breakfast cereals, and arranging their stuffed animals just the way they liked them. He'd even placed Glory's favorite purple elephant on her pillow, remembering how she couldn't sleep without it tucked under her arm. The distant crunch of gravel made his heart skip. A black sedan appeared through the iron gates, moving slowly up the tree-lined drive. Benjamin's breath caught in his throat as he stepped onto the front porch, his knees feeling suddenly weak with anticipation. The car came to a stop, and for a moment everything was still. Then the back door flew open, and two small figures burst out like released butterflies. Grace and Glory, wearing matching yellow sundresses with white lace trim, raced across the lawn toward the porch. Their braids bounced with each step, their faces lit with pure joy as they called his name. Hannah emerged from the driver's side, carrying their small backpacks. She watched as Benjamin crouched down, his arms opening wide. Glory reached him first, launching herself into his embrace with such force that he nearly lost his balance. Her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Grace was right behind, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing her cheek against his. "Papa Ben." Glory's voice was muffled against his shirt. "We came home. We really came home." Benjamin held them both tightly, his eyes squeezed shut as tears rolled down his cheeks. The girls smelled of sunshine and strawberry shampoo. Grace's stuffed bunny was squished between them in the hug, its floppy ears tickling Benjamin's chin. Hannah walked up the porch steps, setting down the backpacks. Her eyes were soft as she watched the reunion. Grace broke away from Benjamin to hug her tightly around the waist. "Mama Hannah, look what we made." She pulled out folded papers from her dress pocket, carefully smoothing out the creases. The drawings showed 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a big house with a chimney and flowers. "That's you," Grace pointed, "and Papa Ben, and me and Glory." The figures were surrounded by hearts and stars with "Our Family" written in wobbly letters across the top. Glory nodded shyly, pointing to the smallest figure. "I drew the bunny too." Benjamin stood up, keeping Glory in his arms as she played with his collar, her small fingers tracing the buttons. The house seemed to breathe again, filling with the gentle chaos of children's laughter and shuffling feet. The emptiness of the past days melted away like morning frost in the sun. That evening, after a dinner of slightly burnt macaroni and cheese, Benjamin was still learning, though he'd followed the box instructions carefully. The family gathered in the living room. The twins sat on the floor, surrounded by their art supplies, while Hannah and Benjamin watched from the couch, their shoulders almost touching. Grace looked up from her coloring, her eyes serious and wide with hope. "Are we gonna stay forever? For real this time?" Glory stopped drawing too, her crayon suspended in midair, both girls waiting with held breath. Benjamin smiled through fresh tears, his voice steady and sure as he reached for Hannah's hand. "Yes," he answered, "forever." The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting warm squares of light across the polished wooden floors. 6 months had passed since that desperate legal battle, and now the same courtroom held a different kind of energy, one of joy and anticipation rather than fear and uncertainty. Grace and Glory stood hand in hand, wearing matching blue dresses with white satin ribbons in their hair. Their eyes sparkled with hope as they watched Benjamin adjust his judge's robes one final time, his fingers smoothing down the familiar black fabric he had worn for decades. Hannah stood beside them in a cream-colored suit, her hand resting protectively on Glory's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over these past months together. The courtroom was filled with familiar faces. Ms. Clara Jennings sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her normally composed demeanor giving way to emotion. Several of Hannah's legal colleagues were present, smiling encouragingly, along with court staff who had watched this unlikely family's story unfold day by day. Even Gerald Prescott had come, his previous prejudices softened by months of seeing the positive changes in his old friend Benjamin, the way the stern judge had transformed into someone who smiled more often, laughed more easily. Benjamin cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "Today marks my final act as a judge," he began, his eyes meeting Hannah's across the space between them. "And I cannot imagine a more fitting conclusion than to make official what our hearts have known for months." His voice held a warmth that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who knew him before the twins came into his life. Hannah stepped forward with the girls, her hands trembling slightly as she raised her right hand. The adoption oath felt different from any legal proceeding she'd ever been part of, more sacred, more profound, as if the words themselves carried the weight of forever. Do you, Hannah Cole, solemnly commit to love, protect, and nurture Grace and Glory as their mother, from this day forward? Benjamin's voice wavered slightly, betraying the emotion he still struggled to express openly. I do, Hannah answered clearly, squeezing the girl's hands tight in her own, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Grace bounced on her toes, unable to contain her excitement, a small giggle escaping her lips. Glory watched with serious eyes, taking in every detail of this moment, but her smile was radiant, revealing the trust she had finally allowed herself to feel. As Benjamin signed the final papers, making it official, the girls' faces lit up with pure joy, the kind that comes from knowing you're finally, truly home. By the power vested in me, Benjamin proclaimed, his voice thick with emotion, I hereby declare this adoption final and complete. Hannah Cole, you are now legally the mother of Grace and Glory Cole. The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound swelling to fill every corner. Grace and Glory threw their arms around Hannah's waist and she knelt down to properly embrace them, breathing in the scent of their shampoo and the indefinable sweetness that was uniquely theirs. Benjamin stepped down from the bench, removing his robe for the last time, folding it carefully over his arm as he closed one chapter of his life and stepped fully into another. The twins turned to him, their eyes shining with tears and wonder. Forever, they whispered in unison, the question holding all their past hurts and future hopes. Benjamin knelt down beside them, a tear rolling unchecked down his cheek as he gathered all three of them, his daughter and granddaughters, into his arms, feeling the circle of family complete at last. Welcome home, girls, he whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with promise, as the setting sun painted the courtroom in shades of gold, turning ordinary moments into something sacred. If you enjoyed the story of Benjamin, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. If you enjoyed the story of Benjamin, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.